This is your fortnightly instalment where I interview a trailblazing physiotherapist that has shaped the profession we are today. In celebrating their journey, knowledge and insights, you gain the opportunity to plan and guide your own professional journey. My name is Doug Carey and welcome to Physio Plus 10. Welcome new and previous listeners to Physio Plus 10. My name is Dr. Doug Carey and our special guest today joining us is Libby Soderholm. Libby, we start these sort of podcasts with a bit of background. So can you sort of give us an idea where you grew up and what your early schooling entailed?
So most of my upbringing was actually in the Torres Straits. We lived on Thursday Island. My dad was the Bishop of Carpentaria. So prior to that, when I was about 7, he was a Navy chaplain for many years, and then he got offered to be the Bishop of Carpentaria. So we moved all the way from Victoria all the way up to the Torres Strait, and I spent 3.5 years there becoming a Torres Strait Islander, really, and climbing coconut trees and fishing and boating and swimming. And then I went off to boarding school in Townsville and spent the next 5 years in boarding school, but still coming back to the Torres Strait and still being part of that community. So that was a different upbringing.
Yeah, how did that, what would you say influenced you, or no, what influences did that seem to have on you if you look back on that now?
I think it was just an eye-opener in ensuring that I was very open to a whole range of different people. The Indigenous people up there are obviously the Torres Strait Islanders. So it just introduced me to a completely different culture. And that was eye-opening, and that allowed me to really look at, that we're so different as individuals, and that, life. It's the world is so interesting, I guess, and so it allowed me to really look at just embracing other cultures. Was probably the best way to put that.
Because I'm thinking that you would have been young enough as a kid to remember what life in Melbourne was like, but young enough as a kid just to sort of accept what was around you and just take it in, so to speak. Because I'm guessing you're only 9 or 10 when you went to the Torres Strait Islands.
7. I was 7. So
okay, yeah.
It was the Torres Strait Islanders, like most Indigenous people, are very open. They were very welcoming, and it was coming from Victoria, which can be a little bit more of a formal, and the weather, of course, was beautiful, and it felt quite free. Prior to that, we'd moved every 2 years in the Navy, so I was having to always, create a new group of friends, get into a new school and all of that. So I think having some stability where we were somewhere for 9 years, we ended up being there. It was just really nice because it became home as opposed to moving every 2 years in the Navy.
Yeah. And did you pick up language or culture from there that you've sort of sustained in some way?
Yeah, so I spoke Pidgin English. In fact, when I went to boarding school, I spoke Pidgin English for the first couple of months, and they had to sort of keep correcting me to ensure that I got back to my English. So yes, we spoke Pidgin English. I did island dancing. We got very involved with the culture. We used to go to Ireland, be invited to some of the island feasts, and we ate turtle and dugong and all the things that the locals ate. So it was a very interesting upbringing, and I enjoyed it. At the same time, if you look at the other side of it, there was some social issues. There was drinking, there was domestic violence, there was some sexual abuse happening within the community that could be quite confronting, and was quite confronting. So, there's good and bad sides to those type of communities, but it was a very enjoyable childhood, particularly in those 3.5 years that I was an islander as such. And I still have very, very good island friends, and I feel like I do understand that Indigenous culture and a lot better than other people that perhaps haven't lived there.
Yeah, so that's you. Siblings around you, older and younger? Where were you sort of in the sibling network?
So I was the youngest. I had an older sister who became a nurse and a midwife, and an older brother who was the second brother, or the second in the family, and he became an electrical engineer and computer scientist. So we all went to boarding school because the schooling up there wasn't of a great standard, and our parents wanted us to get.
I'm not sure, Libby, but I've just lost your audio.
Sorry, is that any
You're
better?
back on now. Yep, gotcha.
Yes, sorry.
So
I
your
must have hit something.
older brother was an electrical engineer.
Yes, so we all went off to boarding school, but our parents wanted us to get a good education. The schooling up there wasn't of great standard, only went to year 10, and they wanted us to get a good education so that we had the opportunity to go to university if that's what we wished to do.
Yeah. I mean, your older sister was a nurse. I mean, Dad was in the church position as a pastor, I guess. Where did the health side of it come in? What was your mum doing? Was she in the health field?
She was a nurse as well. She was a midwife and a child welfare sister, and she was quite interesting because on my holidays I would go out with her. She worked as a child welfare clinic sister, and she would go out to the islands and visit the mums and babies, and I would often go with her if I wasn't working, and I'd go with her and help out. And that was really, there was a sense of achievement and fulfillment in doing that, because you were changing people's lives and improving babies' health, the health of babies and of families, I guess, in that respect. So I think it did have a profound effect on me.
And I guess the question then is why, if your mum was a nurse, your elder sister was a nurse, what sparked your interest in going down the physio pathway?
Well, it was interesting because actually I was pretty good at economics and I really wanted to do architecture, but at the time you had to be pretty good at drawing, and I wasn't very good at drawing. There weren't computers that you could sort of simulate drawing, so I was sort of encouraged not to go down that route. But I was very good at communicating with people, and I did very well at school. So I guess medicine was probably the area that I, could have gone down, but the length of time of medicine was very daunting, and I didn't really want to do it. And so it was suggested that physio was a path that I might contemplate. So I decided to do that. To be honest, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I just had to choose something. And yeah, I chose physio. Whether that was right in hindsight, I don't know, but that was at the time, in reflection, perhaps I should have had a year off and just contemplated life. But I was a bit fearful that I wouldn't then go to uni because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So I just made a decision. And I was originally going to go to Brisbane, the University of Queensland, but my parents got transferred to Bunbury and my dad became the Bishop of Bunbury. So I decided to come over to Perth, just so I think I could be closer to them. I'd lost a little bit. You become very independent at boarding school, and so I'd lost a little bit of that connection with my parents. And I thought, if I'm studying at a university that's so far away, that's not going to improve that connection. So it might be better if I come to WA and go to Curtin, what was Waite, and then became Curtin University.
Yeah.
So I did that.
Now, as extensive as your CV is, Libby, listeners won't find this story on paper nor online. And don't worry, I'm not going to say anything about a table, but I do recall that when you and I were travelling across to Curtin in our undergraduate years with our friend's little yellow buzz box, it only had 2 front seats, and I, for some reason, always found myself getting the tradesman entrance and sitting on this little cushion in the back of the damn thing, facing backwards and no seatbelt on either. I like to think it was my chivalry that sort of put me in this particular situation. Maybe it was my chance for youthful risk taking, but I think it was just my legs were 6'4". I just couldn't fit in the front seat. But what was it about the Curtin experience that particularly you remember as a physio?
Oh gosh, the course was hard, wasn't it? I found it extremely hard. And I'd come from a boarding school which was pretty well girls only. So when I got to uni, I just wanted to party. I didn't really want to study at
That was
all.
my reference to the table for those that didn't get that. Not sure if you're on the
Oh,
table or under the table most of the Curtin course, but
and so we had a wonderful time at uni, didn't we? Because it was only a small cohort of, I think, 45 students. And we all did get very, very close as friends, and we partied together. And the course was hard. So I think when you let your hair down, you really let your hair down, didn't you? So there was some dancing on the tables. I do remember that. And quite a few balls and, social events. That's what I remember about uni, is all the social events. And then, the rest of the time just scrambling to get my assignments and all my assessments done and to pass everything. I didn't do as well at university as I did at high school because there was just too many distractions.
choices. Yeah.
Choices. That's right. And there was endless boys, so that was lots of fun.
Yeah. There's a hand up for a co-ed physiotherapy course. And I thought it was the same too. There was only 3 or 4 guys in the year. It was great because I saw there was like 35, 36 girls. I thought, man, this is the best course on earth for the same reason.
Well,
Okay,
it was a tough course.
Oh, it was. Yeah, I definitely have to agree with that. I'm not sure if it's, in our day it was always tougher. It's that mentality, but yes, I think it was certainly pushing the barriers of capacity for sure. Which is good because you do find out your ability to knuckle down and get things done. And I think now looking back, those choices that we made, I think sometimes just making a choice is the big decision. Make a choice and move on, because if you don't make a choice, you're stuck in that mire of indecision and procrastination, and that doesn't get you anywhere either.
No, and everything that you do, I've realised it doesn't matter whether you were perhaps destined to do that or not. There's a learning that you get from that as you move through, and perhaps to then decide to do something else. So it's never something that you regret or should regret, I don't think, because you're always learning things, aren't you?
Yeah. Now, once you completed your physiotherapy, your first paycheck, freedom, which you'd obviously already experienced from the transition from high school for you, but that professional status, what do you remember about becoming a newly minted physiotherapist when you popped out of the Curtin graduation program?
So it was interesting because I think in my 3rd year of physio, I did a placement in London. A few of us did, and I got to travel in Europe. And I came out of the course with the travel bug, and really what I wanted to do was get a job, get as much experience as I could in the next couple of years, and then travel. That was my goal. And go to, say, England and get some work and do that. So I got a job in Katanning. My grades weren't good enough to get work in the city. And to be honest, I wanted to be in a rural hospital where I could get lots of experience and work in lots of different departments. So I worked at Katanning, and within 6 months, the senior left, and I was put into the acting senior role at 6 months of being a new graduate, because there was no one else to do that. And we had some part-timers, but they weren't really in a position they didn't want the senior position. So I was like, yep, I'll do that. And so that was a huge learning curve as a leader, I guess. And I put that department through accreditation. So I was very proud of that. And so I stayed there for 18 months. But I really and I worked in every area. And in those days, we were on the phone to Perth if you had queries and questions. And I was always on the phone saying, I've got this patient, what should I do? And all the rest. But I was also surrounded by some quite experienced generalist physios who worked in the rural areas, and they were very supportive and very, very helpful. So although I was the senior, they were more senior as far as clinical experience, that's for sure.
So and I think this is important for young physios listening to this, because that's part of the point of the Physio Plus N podcast, is to sort of help younger physios have a bit of an eye as to the decisions and maybe why decisions were made. So you came out with the goal pretty much of getting as much money as possible to enable you to then travel and you were quite happy to work within any sort of environment so that you got experience, but you also, I guess could save some money before you moved on. Were there any specific jobs that you were looking for? You were just happy to have a job, and because I remember at this time, also in historical sense, there was almost a job freeze because I ended up going to Tasmania for my first couple of years. So I guess we didn't have a lot of options for jobs at this stage, and that's maybe why you're in Katanning as well.
Yes. And yes, I just wanted to get as much experience in a range of different areas. I didn't know, I really liked the sound of private practice, but in those days it was very hard to get a job in private practice. And I really wanted to experience a whole range of other things. So that's why I decided to go to Katanning. And I think it was very valuable. I treated everything imaginable, and as well as we did a lot of visits to some of the other towns around, like Kojonup and Noangarup. And so as a physio, you were going in doing an orthopedic out clinic, and that was great because it really made you try and problem solve. You had to problem solve. There was no one else to do that. Anything could walk in the door, and you had to try and resolve it and improve that person's life if you could. So that was challenging, but very exciting because I learned so much in such a very small space of time in that. And I was only there for 18 months before I left to go overseas.
So I guess this is when you bought your overseas ticket.
Yeah, so I bought a one-way ticket to London, and my parents were very upset because they wanted me to, have a return ticket. And I was like, well, I don't know when I'm coming back. So yes, that was very exciting.
That in itself is a big decision. So did you go straight to London? Were you sort of joining the crowd there?
Yeah, so I went to London. I spent most of my money traveling, I think, and when I ran out of money, I'd organised my registration in London. So I started working in public and private hospitals, and so essentially I would work until I had enough money to travel. Then I'd travel and spend that money, and then come back and work. And I spent three years overseas, and I worked in Israel as well on a kibbutz for 3 months picking oranges, and I went everywhere I was allowed to go. And in those days, there was the Eastern Bloc, so some of those countries were restricted. And then I got the offer of a job in Finland. So one of the physios that I worked with in Katanning had a friend in Finland, and she was now a doctor. So she trained to become a doctor from being a physio, and I got a locum position in the hospital. And I couldn't speak any Swedish. And they said, oh, it's okay, just come along. Everyone speaks English. And so off I went to Finland and worked in the public hospital. I had to learn Swedish within about 3 months because, of course, when you're sick in a hospital with a new knee, you don't really want to be speaking English when, you're feeling unwell. So I had to learn to speak Swedish very, very quickly. And so I worked in the public system. That was wonderful. And then I got offered work in a private practice as a locum, and then in another private practice as a locum. And in between, I would travel. I went to America and traveled quite a bit around the place. But yeah, it was just a great, great adventure.
Now, something else must have happened in Finland because you decided to come back to Australia. This is when our paths crossed again in 92 to our postgrad year. But you came back with some extra baggage, I guess.
Well, what happened was when I was working, I really realised that we wanted to start a private practice. I'd met a boy in Finland, and he was big into rehabilitation training. Didn't really have any specific qualifications there, but loved exercise and gym work and getting people healthy. And he worked for Saab in Sweden doing that. So I applied for the sports physio course. So we had decided that what we'd really like to do is start a practice. And in order to do that, I felt like I needed to upskill. So I applied to get into the sports physio course at Curtin. And at that time, it was actually quite hard. I didn't get in. I didn't get accepted. And so I went home because I hadn't been home for 3 years. I went home, and within a day of me getting home, they rang and said, "Oh, someone's cancelled and you're next, and would you like the position?" And so suddenly I had to make this decision. Should I accept it? Because I knew if I didn't accept it, I wouldn't get offered it again. And so I accepted it. And then my boyfriend, who's now my husband, Egan, decided, well, if she's not coming back, I already had a job lined up in Finland, so I could have gone back to another job. But he decided, well, I'm coming over to Australia. And so he arrived, and yeah, that's history, I guess.
So back with mum and dad for the first time in 3 years. You've come back with a boyfriend, not yet husband, and you come back to do postgrad. A pretty congested ball card there, isn't it, Libby?
Yeah. So then I started the course and moved to Perth. Bought a little unit. So I'd accumulated a reasonable amount of income, because when you do locums in Finland, you get about, well, they just throw money at you because they need people to do these locums. So I'd accumulated quite a lot of money. So I gathered it all together and bought a very tiny unit in East Vic Park in Perth, and moved up there and started sports physio. And yeah, within, I think, about 3 or 4 months, I fell pregnant with our first
Just
child.
fell out of the sky, this pregnancy thing.
Just happened. So that was very daunting but exciting at the same time. And so I finished the course and promptly had a baby at the end of that year.
Yeah, no, I remember that as a pretty tough year. And even in my little, I guess, self-assessed bubble as a Manip student, I was thinking, my gosh, Libby, you are doing it so much tougher than all of us, just going through that whole pregnancy thing as well. And yeah,
and it was a hard course as well, the postgrad, wasn't it? There was lots of reading and lots of weekend work that you had to do with sports clubs and things like that. So looking back, it was a tough year.
Yeah, no, it was. But
I was so determined. I was like, well, I'm not going to stop now, because if I stop, I'll never get back and be able to restart it. So I'm just going to finish the course. And I had lots of support from Lance Toomey and the staff, and they just encouraged me to keep going. And off I went.
Yeah, certainly one determined soul. So after you completed the sports physio, I mean, most people then go and work in a clinic, but you'd already had this goal in your mind that you and Egan were going to go your own way, so to speak. And you moved down to this little place called Rockingham, which, 25 or so years ago wasn't the metropolis it is today. So what made you decide to do that?
Well, we did a lot of research, and Rockingham didn't have a lot of clinics. It had great beaches. The houses were cheap. It was half an hour from Perth. So we knew that it would grow, and it was already starting to grow. So we saw an opportunity where, okay, we couldn't really afford to start a practice in Perth, and it was very competitive to start a practice in Perth, but we could certainly start one in Rockingham. So we weighed up all the pros and cons, and we moved down to Rockingham. And they were also building the freeway down to Bunbury, I think, at that stage. So there was a lot of progress. And it was a lovely area, although it didn't have a great reputation at the time, and probably still doesn't, but it is a beautiful, beautiful area, and we love it. So that was why we decided. And, costs for starting a small business, leasing and things like that, were not extreme. So everything was a little bit easier for us, for our business plan and sort of strategy planning.
Yeah, but I guess that's the key. It was quite strategic. You could have just tried to set up in Perth. You could have worked for an existing big clinic, but you really made that decision that you wanted to go and do what you wanted to do. And I guess that was tied a bit with Egan, because, again, 25 years ago, the concept of having a hands-on plus rehabilitation type clinic was quite a new concept, whereas today it would seem quite, blasé.
Oh, it's very common today, but at the time, there was very few private practices that had rehabilitation and a fully equipped gym. Our clinic was the first clinic to have that, and we started very early with the small group training. It was quite frustrating for me as a physio to be treating patients one at a time, because I just felt it was such hard work. You did all this work with the patient, got them better, and then you had to start again with the next patient. And I thought, why don't we assess them so we have a very specific exercise program, and then put them in a small group where they're all still being individualised, but in a small group capacity. And so that's what we started doing, and it was very, very successful, and we really enjoyed that.
Yeah, yeah. So over the next kind of 15 years, you really did knuckle down. You built up that Rockingham clinic, had a swag of kids as well, bought another clinic in Mandurah, but it seems like something started to itch at you in the mid-2010s, and you seem to move focus a little bit, or switch gears into more committees and board type management roles.
Well,
APA
there's a bit of
board,
a
Rego.
there's a
Yeah.
bit of a story before that. So in about the late 90s, we really, again, I guess, strategically looked at where do we want to be sort of 20 years down the track. And what we realized was, whilst having a business was productive and, generated a fairly good income, it wasn't really passive income. It was hard work running a business, either working in the business or on the business. So we did a lot of education, first on running a business, I guess, and self-development. But then we also started to look at other income streams, and we decided to start investing in positively geared residential properties. So we would buy up old properties that needed cosmetic renovations, and we'd do those renovations, and then we'd rent them out. And then once the value of that property had gone up a little bit, we'd do that again. And so we started doing that, and we got to the point where we were buying a property perhaps every year, or maybe two properties depending on how it was. So we realized that the strategic plan was that we would try and sell the businesses by the time we were in our early 50s, and hopefully be self-sufficient in that we didn't have to work unless we wanted to. So creating that passive income, I guess, then allowed us, because I guess there's three ways to have income, right? You can run a business, you can have residential, or you can have property and stocks and shares. So we decided the only thing we could really afford was buying old properties and doing those up. So from that, I guess, and from all our business knowledge then, I decided that at that stage we had two clinics that were fairly large, and I decided we needed either an advisory or a governing type committee or board to start really strategically looking at where do we go with these in order to sell them, because I didn't really want to expand anymore. And if we did, we had to have that in place. So I went and did the AICD Company Directors course, which is a 5-day course with an exam and a big assignment attached to it. And that blew me away in terms of being a bit of a light bulb with governance. And I realised I just loved that. And that's why I love business, but governance in particular was something that I was really keen on. So then I started to sit on a bit more on, purposefully sat on boards and committees, because I realised I just loved that governance. And I was quite good at it in that I had a lot of business skills, finance skills. I had some strategy skills, risk analysis type skills. And as physios, we're just so good at problem solving. So that's part of what we do. And sitting on a board and committee is usually about significant problem solving and getting to the right decision with a variety of people that have different viewpoints. And so I strategically, again, just decided to start to do that with a mindset of, when we do sell the businesses, which was sort of starting to become a little bit closer, that's where I'd like to perhaps spend some of my time. So that's how it all worked out, really.
Where do you think this interest in committees, boards, governance, that sort of thing, is it an extension of your physio subjective, objective problem solving, dealing with people? Is it of a similar nature? Is that, do you think, something you just have inside you that probably a lot of physios do unknowingly?
Well, I think, one of my main interests when I look back at high school was economics and commerce, and that in turn, I guess, is part of that whole governing, it's economics that sort of runs all policies and that type of thing. So I think it probably comes from that, and I just didn't really realise it at the time. And then doing a lot of business self-development sort of started to, I realised that I really enjoyed that and was good at that. And I also made it then a conscious decision in that era of just stepping away from clinical work and focusing just on the businesses and doing some of this other work on the side. Most of that was voluntary, although some of it was paid. I did work for APRA and sat on some of their committees for the Physio Board of Australia and things. So there was some paid work in that. But I realised you've got to love it, because otherwise it doesn't necessarily pay all that well. But it is very, very rewarding, because you're often, and you're always learning in those type of environments. There's so many people around the table that have such diverse skills that there's just this incredible learning curve. And I realised that I'd become a little bit burnt out as a clinician, and I needed more challenges, some bigger challenges. I couldn't do the same old getting a patient better and then starting on the next one. It was just too much like Groundhog Day for me. So I just needed those challenges, and sitting on boards and committees, if anything, well, it's very, very challenging, can be very challenging.
And the couple you're with now, South Coastal Health and Community Services and Cultural Curtin Heritage Living, did you choose them for particular reasons? Like, again, you're quite strategic in what you've done historically. Was this another strategic decision?
Well, I went to see a recruiter, because one of the things with sitting on boards and committees is you really need to work out where you can value add to those boards and committees. So what are your skill set? And I was a good physio, but out of that, you have to find what you're really good at from a skill set. So I had a chat with a recruiter, and she said, well, you need to start with some sit on a good local for a local organisation, a board, and get some skills. And so South Coastal was a local organisation. So I approached them, and they very happily, because I had clinical governance, so being a physio, I had that health background. They ran mental health services, women's health services, and Indigenous health services. And so there was that connection. And so I joined that board. And then a year later, I became chair of that board. And I have been running that for the last year or so. And that's very challenging. That's a voluntary board, but I just love it, because it's always challenging me in regards to where do we find funding and all these other challenges that you don't get running a private practice. And so I've learnt so much. And then I applied to sit on an aged care board. So that's Curtin Heritage Living up in the western suburbs of Perth. And that's a paid board. And again, my clinical governance, because they're looking for that type of director who has those skills. And I had skills running a business. I had finance and risk skills. I had HR skills. I had building a culture type skills. So they were looking for all of those skills. And so, again, that's been, suddenly the aged care space, which I hadn't worked in for absolutely ages. And that's been, they do not just aged care, but they do retirement living. So they're involved in property. They do they do normal just community care work. They do dementia care. So there is a range of it's a fairly large organisation with a wide scope of services that they provide. So that's just been very enjoyable. I guess that whole learning curve again, and being able to contribute.
What I get is that there are some things that you have, but there are many more things that you've had to gain. And you've enjoyed those sort of challenges and those sort of learning curves too associated with it. How many hours do you put aside for these types of board engagements?
Well, they're all part-time positions. There's usually about 8 board meetings a year, and usually you're on some subcommittees as well. It's probably a couple of hours a week. If you're a chair, it's a bit more, because there's a bit more organisation, and a chair's role on a board is really liaising with the CEO and supporting the CEO to ensure there needs to be a really good relationship between the CEO and the chair. So my role as chair probably takes me a little bit longer because there's additional sort of meetings behind the scenes to try and plan for some of those board meetings. And the chair's role also is to try and encourage those diverse conversations at the board, but then also try and collate those decisions as a board and make sure that we're all happy with the decision moving forward for the organisation. So that's been something that's been very challenging for me, but really enjoyable. And I've sort of grown into that role by watching other chairs and having sort of, I guess, mentors that I've been able to reach out to. I joined Women on Boards, which was a fabulous organisation that supports women that sit on boards and committees. So was really advantageous and gives me a lot of support. And it allowed me to build a network of other women that were perhaps in similar or different situations, but were all very supportive of women. Because, when you look at the percentages, there's not a lot of women on boards and committees. And part of that is the whole, getting women promoted into the executive space and then into board space. But nowadays there are more women coming in like I did, who don't sit in the executive space, but have just come into organisations with other skills.
Yeah. And for younger physios that are listening to this and maybe considering this as part of the mix of what they want to do to sustain, I guess, their interest in their profession, but also in their own development, what sort of payment would they be considering that they might get if they're on a paid role just as a member of a board?
Yes, so that can range considerably from around 20 to 30,000 up to hundreds of thousands, depending if you're sitting on, mining boards and some of those international boards. So it very much varies, but I would encourage people to sort of sit on a voluntary board initially just for that learning experience. And there's lots of those around. You can sit on school boards and, they're not always run well, but there are lots of committees and boards that you can sit on just to get some experience. And, that's advantageous. But there are a lot of boards out there that, I do a lot of my work just because I'm now in the capacity where we've sold our businesses. We sold those in 2021. And so I guess we're semi-retired because of the passive income that continues to sustain us. We can continue to, I can do some voluntary work and I guess give back to my community, which I feel very strongly is worth doing. There are, of course, directors that build up a complete portfolio of directorship, so they might sit on 4 or 5 boards, and they're perhaps all paid boards or maybe one voluntary board and the rest are paid. And so you can definitely build a career out of it if that's what you want to do. I'm what they call probably a part-time director. It allows me to have a bit of life-work balance as well, which is always advantageous, I think. But, you can earn really good money if that's your focus. It's just about getting some experience and then setting those goals and then applying and being prepared. There's lots and lots of board positions that I've applied for because I think, oh, well, I'm pretty good at it. I can do that. And, someone else who's obviously better or more experienced has taken that position. So you just have to be willing to fail, I guess, and just keep putting in your applications until you get on a board that you want to be on, and that aligns with your values, I guess, and your purpose. And these are both, they're not necessarily just health, they're health and community type boards, but obviously that aligns with my values. And it's also my area of expertise in health, so I feel that I can contribute substantially. And being a business owner, I have a good background in finance and risk, and I love figures and doing all of that. So that's just, maybe I should have done commerce or something like that.
but I like this because when I've spoken to a few people about this, someone might say, as a high school person, I really liked drama, I really liked the health, and I really liked teaching or something like that. And then they look back on their life now and they're 55, 60 and they said, they were a physio. They did go into teaching courses to other physios, and they also were involved in the production of educational videos that involved drama, lights, makeup, scripts, all that sort of stuff. And so they kind of look, and you're saying the same in a way. You really, as a kid coming off the island, you really like the economics, you like the architecture, and you like the health field. Well, you've done the health field. You could sort of say you've knocked off the economics too by coming into sort of these roles of finance and management of boards. And in a way, the architecture is about building things. And although
yeah. That's why I loved property. Yeah,
yeah,
I
exactly.
love the property investment because it was all about, I see a space and I can transform that. I can paint this and rip out the carpets and change this, and yeah.
Correct. So in a way, you've fulfilled all your what you wanted to do, coming into high school, but you've just done them in roundabout ways. And it's interesting when you look back on those types of, I wish I'd done this, or I thought I could have done that. But when you look back on it, it often comes back that we've done them in different ways anyway. And so we don't have to do the right thing at the right time. It's just we have to do something. And often we come around the big circle, we go, oh, I've done all those things already.
And I think you get drawn back to those areas of interest. So something will perk your interest. So when we were doing a lot of business training, the whole passive investment, trying to get passive income from residential property investment and creating that, positive gain of not having to pay off a mortgage every month, but having the rent actually pay that, positively gearing a property was very, very attractive. But of course, now we've got a whole lot of very old properties that we think, what are we going to do with these? Well, the property market's doing pretty well, so.
Yep, I'm sure you'll work that out in your grand design. Now, whilst you might not identify yourself as being a physio so much now, what would you say was one of the hardest lessons you had learnt as a physio?
I think that you can't get everybody better because it does rely on a lot of support from the person and cooperation. But I think the thing that really frustrated me was the treating one patient at a time. And so I began doing a lot of mentoring, employing more physios, mentoring them, looking at how do we improve them as a physio, auditing, perhaps what they're doing in the consulting rooms, trying to, I guess, generate more physios to be able to create that ability to treat more patients, because it was very frustrating to me that you'd continue to just, Groundhog Day for me. And I guess by the end of that, I was a good physio. So it was a little sad to stop work and just focus on the business. It was productive in that sense, but it was hard to do that because I had a lot of patients that wanted to come and see me. I had to keep putting my prices up just until the numbers dropped, I remember. Just put them up all the time, which sounds rather ruthless, but it's the only way to drop your client numbers if you really want to stop. And then you just see those clients who are happy to pay a fair amount to see you, to be treated by you.
One business strategy, that's for sure, that you could employ. For $200 or less, what's the best book, app, or tool or other investment you've found assisted you in your development along your career as a physio?
Yeah. Well, I probably don't have a lot as a physio, but in my development as a person, Rich Dad, Poor Dad was a great book by Robert Kiyosaki. Lean In, which is all about women stepping up into leadership. And I think as physios, we are leaders because we're, encouraging patients to improve their lives, and we have really good leadership capacity. Women aren't as good at that as men are, I think, in stepping into that role of leaning in at the table and saying, yes, I'll do that, and being part of the role. Why is that?
Like, just hold that point for a minute. Why do you think that is from your experience?
I think it's the way we're brought up. I think we're never really encouraged. I was definitely encouraged to go more down the health field where I would have a set career and be able to work as a nurse or a GP or a physio, and not necessarily encouraged to go and do a bit more of a broader degree. So I think it is how we're brought up, and it's perhaps our mindset. So, for example, a woman who might be looking at a job criteria, she might do 3 out of those 5, but that's not really enough to apply for the job. A man might look at it and say, well, I can do 2 out of 5, but I'm going to apply for that job. So there is a bit more of a confidence, I think, that women can struggle with and need to almost empower each other to say, well, 3 out of 5 is pretty good. You should just apply for that job and you might get it.
Yeah.
So, but I do think it comes a little bit from our upbringing that makes women lean back rather than lean into the table.
Yeah, so that phrase lean in probably means more to a female than it does to a bloke because he's already leaning in.
He's already leaning in, and from a young child, he's been taught to lean in and step forward. And a woman, I think, hasn't necessarily had that. The other book that I really enjoyed was Crucial Conversations. So conversations to have, when the stakes are high. And I think that as a physio, that's really beneficial to be able to have those direct but soft conversations with patients about how to change their lives, but also as a leader and certainly sitting at boards and committees, being able to have those very crucial conversations, and just in life in general, with family members and things like that, things can get tricky, and being able to have those crucial conversations and talk about the things that are really important rather than, not really talk on that subject is I think really, really important. So they would be probably books, because I grew up with books. When we were doing all our business development, we had all these tapes, I remember, of, Wayne Dyer and Brian Tracy and all of these people from around the world that, we used to listen to. And now, of course, it's all in other methods of learning. But books were always a way for us to improve ourselves.
Yeah.
So.
What would you say has been one of the most out on a limb decisions that you've made in regards to your career so far? And what was the outcome of that decision?
So starting a clinic that had a gym as part of that and offered rehabilitation was probably a bit of an out on a limb decision. Deciding to invest into property for us was, we were just told we were crazy, absolutely crazy, everybody around us. We were buying up these old properties. We couldn't afford anything else except, it had to be to fit this criteria, and it had to be positively geared, in fact, so that because we didn't have any money. We didn't have the money to pay additional mortgage payments at the end of each month. So the rent had to cover. So that was a risk, because we had huge mortgages for all these properties that, and we just had to sit and wait and hope that the market would go up and the rents would go up, which of course they do with time, don't they? They always do. But you can have dips and flows.
You can have tenants that leave and they don't pay the mortgages, and they can.
Oh, we definitely had all of that. We had all of that and more.
I'm waiting for the book.
I remember we couldn't afford to pay someone else to manage it, because that would have meant that, we wouldn't have been able to be positively geared, and we would have run out of money every month. So we had to manage them ourselves, and that was hard work. So as soon as we, were able to, we moved those over and got someone else to manage them, which was always a wise decision. Sorry, I've forgotten the question there, but have I answered that?
Well, I mean, what was the outcome of that decision? I'm wondering, an aside or another question that comes to mind is, what was the stress level for you at this time? You've got a business that's new. You've got a couple of kids around. You've got all these mortgages that you have to be paid on. There's no give in that system. I mean, what was your stress level like? And do you perceive it as stress, or was it not stressful?
I think I tried to just enjoy the journey, and it was very busy. We were so busy because, on the weekends we'd go out, we'd look at properties, we'd be doing business development, you're running businesses. But I did have a husband who, we were able to sort of job share a little bit. So he would be at home with the kids when I'd be working, and vice versa. So we tried not to have the kids at daycare too much. and tried to have that good balance. So it was just really busy for about 15 years, super duper busy. And I can remember we couldn't afford to go, on holidays for quite a few years. When we did, it was like, oh, we must have reached a certain point where we can, we have that ability to do that. So
Yeah.
it was tough, but I think we put a lot of that. It was our decision to invest because we realised that we needed to generate passive income. The physio clinic, yes, if you build a clinic that is multiple clinics, you might have that capacity, but otherwise it's very hard. It's a service industry. It's not like you're developing a product that you can then just multiply. As a physio, there's only so many physios you can get to work, and we know what that's like in today's market. So it's a tricky scenario to be able to grow that and to be able to grow it successfully. So we realised that passive income, if we were going to be able to retire in our 50s, which was the goal, which was the strategic goal, was that we needed to do something. And that's, investing in shares or investing in property.
Yeah. Looking again, this is sort of a bit retrospective, this little section of questions, but what sort of 3 things stand out for you professionally in what you've done or achieved or learnt so far?
I think to just really, it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to fail. And in fact, the more failures that you have, the better you succeed, because you get yourself up the next day and you dust yourself off and off you go again. So failing or getting something wrong is, and we certainly did that in business. We did it in real estate. We do it in share. It happens all the time, but not being too hard on yourself when that happens. The other thing is to lean in, is to say yes more often. I remember, and I was probably very busy, but I was very good at saying, no, I can't sit on that committee. I can't do this. I can't do that. So perhaps just leaning in and being purposeful and enjoying the journey. I can remember doing a lot of worrying through a lot of those years. And sometimes it's about just enjoying the journey, trying not to worry too much. Just allow it to happen, because at the end of the day, you're not going to sit on your deathbed and say, well, spent too much. I shouldn't have spent so much time at home. You want to be able to spend as much time at home and have that life balance. So just enjoying that.
Well, I guess that's the essence of mindfulness in a way, is that regardless of what your decision or what choice you make, if you live in the moment, you're enjoying the moment, that's fulfilling in the moment, and we can't plan the future, we can't change the past. So I guess the more of us that can spend more of the time, appreciating exactly what is happening here and now, then our life, I think, is way more fulfilling. And I guess that's what we're all after in a way.
Yes. Yes, it's probably about mindfulness. That takes a while to learn, that mindfulness. You
Totally.
really have to focus on it. It's probably about meditation, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, we've only got, on average, I think it's 4,000 weeks to live on average. And, there's an infinite, so we're finite in our capacity to engage in whatever we choose to engage in, but there are infinite things to do, to see, to learn, to travel to eat, to meet, to choose. So straight away we're on the back foot if we're trying to achieve that. But if we just turn around into ourselves and say, well, let's just make a conscious decision about what I do, and whatever I do decide to do I enjoy, or I do to my best of my capacity, then you're kind of freeing yourself up from all those infinite choices to make, and you're just saying, well, whatever choice I do make, it's here and now, and this is what, it's like this conversation, like there are many things we could be doing, but this is what we've decided to do, and this is what we're, going into as much as we can.
Yeah. And I guess as well, it is about having a focus, having a goal. We always had these sort of strategic goals that we would try and update every couple of years. And you do as much as you can to get there. It may or may not work out the way you've planned, and you've got to just let that go. But having those plans in place, like any organisation, if you have those plans in place and you start to try and slowly execute it, eventually will, hopefully. And if it doesn't, well, you take another path, don't you?
I think that's exactly the right. We plan as best we can based upon what we know, but we're also nimble enough to realise that what we plan necessarily won't take effect. So we're happy to recalibrate and change and move in a different direction. And it's not being concreted into a plan. That nimbleness gives us the capacity to move around with relative ease, and I think that's a good thing to understand. And maybe you and I can understand that now in our 50s, and I certainly didn't understand it in my 20s.
No.
And that in some ways was a stressful thing, because I always thought I'm missing out on something because there was so much to do, but you can't do it all, and that's the reality. So just enjoy what you do decide to do. Which segues into a lovely little question. If you could step back to your younger self, not saying that you're old yet, but if you could step back to your younger self, what pieces of advice would you like to pass on to the young Libby Jamieson?
I was always very stressy as a kid, always worried about, that decision, as we've just been talking about that decision. So I probably would have said to myself, you just need to go and do some meditation and some yoga every day. Just spend half an hour or 20 minutes or 10 minutes or 5 minutes. Just focus on that, because that gives you clarity, I think, and gives you mindfulness. Not to be too worried. And if you don't know what to do, just do something, because that you'll learn from that experience, and you might realize, well, I don't want to be doing that, and that's okay. You just do something else. You don't know. But if you've got a plan, well, you strategically look at how do I achieve that, and what's my time frame, and how do I get there in that time frame, and that can create really good success if you allow that to happen. Yep. So having that plan, but also not being too stressed about it all. And so I don't regret doing physio. I learned so much doing physio. Would I go back to it? Probably not now, because there's just too much else that I find is challenging and rewarding that I can be doing with my time. And to be honest, being a physio can be hard work, can't it? You can get really burnt out. Patients can be difficult, but it can also be highly rewarding, especially when you get great outcomes and grateful patients. So, but if it stops being rewarding, you need to turn and do something else, or have a break and go back to it, or just change tack slightly and see where that leads you. Yep. Not be afraid to sort of stay on that path because that's what you've been doing, but just allow yourself to jump off and do something else and see how you like it. And if you do like it, well, you follow and pursue that. And if you don't, you can do something else.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like the evaluation is the important part of it. If I'm enjoying this, if it's fulfilling my needs, and it's that thing that I've decided to do, which is working out for me, or whatever choice it was I made, yeah, it's great. I'll continue with it. But again, I think sometimes we do get a bit locked into a groove, and shifting that mindset can be as scary as making a change. So to me, it's like, we'll just make the change and then learn from that change, rather than sitting in the groove and just, getting stuck there.
Well, yeah, because it sort of affects your psyche, doesn't it? And you're not really doing what you should be doing at that point in time. So you do need to change it. But it can be hard because, you can get stuck running a business, and it's not necessarily easy to exit that. So you've got to, hang out until you have that opportunity. Yeah. So there are things that it can be hard to just jump off the wagon and go and do something else. But you can always keep learning if that's an area you want to go into and you're a bit restricted. So I would just encourage people to do that.
Yeah, so looking forward, again, you're kind of probably not so much in the physio profession now, but you've definitely got toes in the different parts of it. Where would you like to see our profession going in the next few years?
I just think that practitioners need to be paid for their time, and I don't think in many cases we're paid appropriately for the expertise that we have, particularly with older physios that have huge amounts of expertise and can treat and get great results. So having that value for physio, and I wonder if that's because physio has come from a female profession where some of those professions weren't paid as well, and therefore historically, the compensable bodies weren't paying as well as they would in other professions. And even though, well, we still are predominantly a female profession. Anyway, so I would say that. I would also say that, I feel like manual skills, and you'll probably agree with me because you're the same era, manual skills or manual therapy is often given a bad rap because of lack of research. And yet it is such a fabulous value in reducing pain and getting patients moving so that then exercise can maintain where they want to be. So we need to get over that lump, that hump of not teaching our young graduates really good manual therapy skills, because it's really, really important, I think. So valuing them, and also just, there's been some physio creep as far as professional creep into our profession. I think that's still happening. The APA is doing some work in trying to resolve that, but that's an issue I would say as well for physio, that we need to be looking at those areas and ensuring that that's not happening, because we have a vast array of expertise in a whole variety of areas, and we need to be ensuring that professional creep is not happening by other professions.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, thank you. And what about, where do you see yourself going in the next few years? Like, what are your sort of goals? You say you're semi-retired, you've got a passive income, you're giving back to the community, but what are the sort of things you want to achieve yourself in the next few years?
So it would be good. I'd like to sort of sit on a national board. I think I did work with ARPRA for a period of time. So somewhere nationally, I'd like to sit on a national board if there's one available and I have the right skill set. So I may do that. I don't really want to take up a whole lot more board positions. They are, fairly time consuming, and I want to be able to enjoy life and have that balance. We do a lot of travel now, so we will go to Europe at least once a year and travel around to other places as well. So we have family in Finland, so we need to be able to get there. Those parents are getting slightly older now, and it's important. Family is very important, isn't it? So I think for me, it's about spending time with family and enjoying the roses, not having to stress too much with running a business. You know how stressful that can be.
Absolutely. Well, Libby, thank you so much for sharing your insights along your pathway as a physiotherapist, and I guess culminating in moving towards gone from a clinician to a business owner, selling to businesses, developing independence, spending some time in community and with boards and committees, and you've really optimised that career pathway in the direction that you chose to go, and it's working well for you, which is fantastic. So thanks heaps for sharing your journey, and it's much appreciated.
Pleasure. My pleasure.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Physio Plus 10, in which I trust you gained some valuable insights. It'd be awesome if you could leave your 2 cents worth as a review or rating of this podcast, and I look forward to sharing the story of another trailblazing physiotherapist with you in 2 weeks' time. Stay safe. Bye for now.